think we can safely say by this stage that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, isn't crazy about dissent, even if it's from a woman. Sally fears she'll be dismissed for speaking out, so her words are being voiced by an AI avatar. She works at a vast mine in North America. She's an electrician keeping soot-covered 3-storey high machines running, where shutdowns can cost millions of dollars a day. It's a skilled, physically demanding role, traditionally a male domain.
Every time you show up new on site, you are guilty until proven innocent. And you have to go above and beyond to just walk into a room and have people not stop talking when you're there, so that they know you're competent. It usually lasts about 2 weeks to a month, but it's exhausting. It's exhausting.
Sally is good at her job. After that sexist probation, she got on great with the guys. Then the mine began introducing diversity quotas.
So out of every 4 apprentices hired from off-site from a program, 1 of them has to be a diverse candidate at least. As far as hiring, I think there's lofty targets. I've been told we sit at about 20% women right now, but they want 30. They want more.
The quotas and the DEI training that came with it changed the atmosphere at the mine and how she was then treated.
We have a lot of guys that were formally supportive and open and helpful, and, they really liked working with women, and they still do, but there is an undertone of bitterness about it now.
How does that bitterness come out?
I think it's less about the women themselves and more about the guys being told that they're constantly the problem. You can only be told that you're the villain in somebody's story for so long.
Would you say the training's doing more harm than good?
Absolutely. There's an undertone of something, and, the targets we've set, I think, just make the narrative that we will get more women here at all costs, not, take the time to get the right ones necessarily. And I know a lot of guys have feelings about that. They've had friends apply to the job and they can't get on.
Of the female hires that have happened since this kind of hard quota came in, do you think women have been recruited who aren't up to the job?
100%, yeah. It's really unfortunate. I find with the women on site, we kind of get lumped together as one entity. So if somebody else is not doing well, they're not performing, they're causing issues on the crew, I'll be approached about that. They'll go, "This is happening. Can you do something about this?" And I'm like, well, hey guys, just because we're both women, it's not my deal to deal with. But it furthers that narrative that we're hiring people who aren't qualified.
I mean, I guess in your industry as well, when you're dealing with electrics and serious safety concerns, you kind of want people that know how to do the job.
Absolutely. It's a wildly safety-sensitive job. We have other trades on site too. We have welders, millwrights, heavy-duty mechanics. So if you haven't been around that kind of equipment before, or you don't have the knowledge base to be working with that, then that's a serious concern.
Do you feel sorry for the guys?
Sometimes. I feel bad for the men sometimes because we've gotten to a place where no one's really considering their mental health, and we're not considering the things that they've got going on. There's a shocking suicide rate in male tradespeople.
It's fair to say Sally isn't entirely convinced by the intentions behind the DEI drive.
I would believe it more if I had a washroom in the pit. You know what I mean? If you're down in the bottom of the pit, it'll take you about a 10-minute drive to get to the nearest washroom. If you're talking with the tradeswomen, then I would say 60% are frustrated. They want the standards to be exactly the same. That is what we fought for so long, to just be equal. That's all we wanted. We just wanted a chance and to not be groped at work. And now it's kind of like, every time we talk about it, it feels like the preferential treatment pendulum has swung a little bit too far to the other side.
A company so keen to push a DEI quota threw the doors open to bring in more women, but then didn't provide them with loos or with proper training for highly precarious jobs, whilst then making the existing female workers feel like DEI hires. It's hard not to feel cynical that so much of this is performative and poorly implemented. A pendulum that absolutely needed to move, but as Sally says, has overswung. In this 5th and final episode of White Men Can't Work, with me, Tim Samuels, thanks for sticking with us if I've been cancelled by now, how a 30-year career can be wiped out in 1 second over one word. The wider damage DEI has done to our empathy for others.
Didn't really know what to think of it. Just packed up my stuff and that was me, done.
If the diversity training programs aren't fit for purpose, what should take their place?
If I chuck DEI, I replace it with classical liberal values. I would replace it with true equality.
And when the DEI dust eventually settles, how on earth are we going to look back at this era?
As an unnecessarily cruel and divisive period of history, and like a kind of madness. That's probably not something as a psychologist I should say. Thinking about people who've actually lost their livelihoods and their reputations for things like stating biological facts or, being wrongly accused of racism or patriarchy.
That's all in our final show on podcast and YouTube of White Men Can't Work. All our episodes are at timsamuels.com, and if you're on YouTube, give that subscribe button a little push. Professor Eric Smith, our rhetoric guru at York College of Pennsylvania, loves a quiz.
Sure. I love quizzes.
Even a racist one, because every interaction, even a quiz, is laden with racism in the world of critical social justice theory, the ideology underpinning DEI.
Somehow this exchange is racist. We just haven't figured it out yet. Right? We're not educating enough to see where it's racist.
But how might they think it's racist?
How is this racist? You're the one asking the questions. I have to answer. I have to respond. I'm not interviewing you. Racist.
So I'm using my whiteness to dominate and demand that you dish up answers. Yeah.
Yes. It really is that silly.
Would you like some reparations for this?
You're damn right.
On to the quiz.
So I'm going to give you some terms which civil servants in Northern Ireland are not allowed to say.
Okay.
How do you think you're going to get on?
Well, I'm not only a former diversity officer, I'm currently a rhetorician, so I should be good at this.
Okay.
But who knows?
Okay. She's young at heart.
She's youthful.
I'm afraid you're not allowed to refer to youth. It's ageist, so you have to say she's really energetic or lively.
Got it.
Okay. Non-religious people. You're not allowed to say non-religious people.
You're not allowed to say non-religious people. Spiritually alternate?
I mean, I like that, but you just say atheists and agnostic people.
Okay. That's not necessarily accurate, but I guess all right.
Yeah, I think really you could have a job at the Civil Service Northern Ireland Linguistics Department after this. And finally, you can't use the term millennials. What would you say instead?
I have no idea. Millennial. Why is millennial offensive? Do they say that? Do they explain?
Yes. Let me leaf through one of the 26 pages in this. Only refer to a person's age if it's relevant to the subject matter, and avoid using generational labels, as this can reinforce negative stereotypes. So you can't say Generation X, baby boomers, or millennials.
All right. I think Gen X is a compliment, but okay, that's fine. I have no idea.
All I can say is you are a walking microaggression. You're virtually macro.
I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you very much.
The workplace is a microaggression minefield, and that's putting men on tilt. Our JL Partners polling has found that in the UK, 41% of white men, a plurality, say they are often anxious that as a white man they can be sacked over doing or saying the wrong thing. That's nearly 10 million men, 47 million in US terms, who are often anxious. Of course, it's good and overdue for men to think about the consequences of what we say or do, to not just blokishly blurt out things or worse. But it feels like we're losing something in the way humans connect with each other that sanitises away humour and debate and a basic sense of humanity.
I was the one that would dress up as Father Christmas and walk in with a sack of presents when you have the Secret Santa. Normally, if there was something going on, there was a good chance I'd be involved in it.
In your 27 years on and off at Lloyd's, did anyone ever complain about you for being racist, for being sexist,
No.
being a bully?
No.
Carl Borgneil was the guy in the office you'd go to with tech problems, an affable manager who kept the back end running at Lloyd's Bank. Someone who'd worked his way up to the senior team, despite having dyslexia. He mentored 3 junior colleagues, all of whom happened to be non-white. When the bank announced an online DEI training session, race education for line managers, Carl was eager to attend.
I was just interested to hear what was going to be said, really. And then if through that something came or sprang into my mind, which often they do in terms of questions and elaborating the training and the knowledge, then obviously I would ask them.
The session entered treacherous terrain.
We got on to a subject which was impact over intent, and asked a question. And the question was very simply, as a line manager, if I heard a person from an ethnic minority use a word to another person of the same ethnic minority, that if used outside that group might be considered offensive, how would you manage that situation in the workplace?
When Carl didn't get an answer, he tried to reframe the question. What should you do if 2 people from the same ethnic minority use a slur amongst themselves, just as, say, rappers have reclaimed certain words?
So, obviously, my neurodiverse brain goes, oh, they don't understand. Give an example. That'll help. Unfortunately, the neurodiverse brain is not good at screening. So out comes the example. Unfortunately, out came the example with the inappropriate word in full, being the N-word.
As soon as the N-word in full came out of your mouth, did the bit of your brain that might normally have caught this sort of thing realise what you'd just done, that you crossed the line?
Once she became aggressive, yes, which was almost instantaneous. So yes, probably yes.
At the start of the meeting, the trainer had laid out the parameters. The goal is to start talking, so please speak freely and forgive yourself and others when being clumsy today. Yet, the black woman leading the training session was so offended by the word, she took off 5 days sick. The course provider complained, and Lloyd brought disciplinary action for gross misconduct against Carl. Despite the training being a space to speak freely, Carl's attempt to apologise, a flawless near 30-year career, testimony from a speech therapist that Carl's dyslexia caused him difficulties in posing questions, he was found guilty of gross misconduct and sacked. Lloyd stated, Carl's language contravenes the values of the group as an anti-racist organisation.
It must have been a real gut punch, that.
yeah, and I got a hell of a gut to punch. So yeah, didn't really know what to think of it. Just packed up my stuff and that was me, done. Got on to a solicitor. That was the point. The first time I told my family, so my family hadn't known up to that point.
The fallout was devastating.
Couldn't get a job because if anyone wrote for a reference, Lloyd's were going to tell him that I'd been sacked for gross misconduct. My financial situation was getting quite dire. I was suffering from very high stress, which has resulted in depression, problems with my stomach, my back, my shoulders and neck had all seized up. I didn't want to leave the house, didn't want to talk to anybody. My relationship had broken up with my partner.
A partner he'd just had a baby with. Carl vowed to fight Lloyd's, to not be tarnished as a racist. With support from the Free Speech Union, he took the bank to an employment tribunal and won. He'd been unfairly dismissed. Lloyd had acted disproportionately and unreasonably and could merely have given him a warning and some extra training. It had taken 2.5 years to be vindicated.
How difficult has it been to find work since all this?
I looked around. I didn't want to go back into corporate. So what I've done is I've retrained as a locksmith, and I'm got a little business doing some locksmithing, which is kind of just slowly growing.
And I presume you might have switched bank accounts. You're not with Lloyd's
No,
these days?
no, I still bank with Lloyd's.
Still? Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't I? There's hardly a single member of staff that's done any harm to me in Lloyd's. It was a corporate attitude driven probably through the HR department. Tiny bit of the bank. They didn't even know me. I was a number to them.
A warning and a sprinkling of humanity, that's all it would have taken, not crashing a man's career and mental health. Even the very prospect of ending up like Carl, saying or doing the wrong thing at work, is seriously denting men's emotional well-being. Our polling also found around 8 million white men in the UK, 33%, say their mental health has directly suffered because of DEI, fearing a misstep could cost them their jobs. A third of white men, which in the US would equate to 38 million guys who are suffering. The mental toll spikes even higher amongst white middle-aged men, reaching 46%, who report that DEI has affected their mental well-being. All this reinforces what psychotherapist Phil Mitchell's seeing in his work with boys and men, many of whom feel deeply marginalised.
They have been told to just shut up. They've been told that, their opinions, in very blunt terms, their opinions do not matter because they are men. They've been told, yes, the biggest killer of males under 45, I think it is suicide. Do us a favour and increase the male suicide rate. It needs to be more. Absolute, just horrible, vicious things that, and this goes on online all of the time. And we don't see headlines about that. We don't see anything.
He told me about one boy who, during a lesson on the suffragettes, mentioned that some men too used to be denied the vote. He was put into detention, and his parents contacted over this display of toxic masculinity. Boys, he says, are being demonised, whilst at the same time seeing the support that girls are getting.
But a lot of boys men are scared, and so they're silent. They walk away. They avoid people. They have this huge anxiety, and a lot of them will develop this real severe anger at what they consider to be the double standards.
White working class boys and young men are bottom of the educational pile in Britain. But DEI, largely an American import, fails to factor in class. That's like having a cream tea without a scone. In episode 3, I spoke to Lee Chambers, a black business psychologist who works to build meaningful inclusion in companies. He's been listening to lads in the working class areas he grew up in.
Some of them do worry about their own opportunity. From the northeast to the northwest, we've been speaking to, these lads, and some of them are scared about what their future opportunities might be. I think, recently one said that I'm not sure if, as a young white lad who sounds like this, that I'm gonna get considered. It's just hard to be a boy now. Like, what is a man gonna be? I'm just trying to grow up and, get some skills and learn some stuff. And I just feel like the world's against me. And that's how quite a lot of them feel. Well, you only need to look at the social indicators across different territories. Educational attainment for boys, the gap is just drifting. And no one seems particularly interested in even considering why that's happening, never mind looking to close that gap.
DEI schemes and companies have backfired by telling white men they're privileged. Amongst white working class boys, Lee Chambers sees a similar dynamic playing out.
From what I'm seeing in the schools work that we do, young boys are feeling more marginalised, and what that is doing is it's basically making them more resistant towards inclusion as a concept. And more than ever, it's actually creating a gap between boys and girls in terms of belief sets and ways of operating.
No wonder half the men we polled fear the next generation of young men will be worse off than the current one, with nearly a third saying their sons will have fewer opportunities explicitly because they're white and male. Okay, let's take stock of where we've got to across the series. How's the DEI ledger looking? What has $10 to $20 billion a year got us? Well, according to Harvard professor Frank Dobbin and the actual data, it's not meaningfully improved the lot of women and minorities thanks to that divisive, counterproductive implementation. Nor, reports Professor Alex Edmonds at London Business School, has DEI been good for business. Granted, some people will have got opportunities they'd previously been denied because of discrimination, and we're having the conversations about racism and sexism. Many might be more likely to think twice before causing actual offence or hiring people just because they look like us. At what price though? Beyond the billions that could have gone elsewhere, a loss of free speech, the triumph of ideology over evidence, quotas over meritocracy, millions of men feeling alienated and anxious, and untold numbers facing discrimination, the demeaning label DEI hire, boys further marginalised. Hardly a roaring success. But has my white-ish gaze missed some magical upsides? Getting someone on the show to make the DEI case has been challenging. Dozens weren't interested, others pulled out at the last minute.
There is a bit of despondency. People are feeling quite attacked.
Marsha Ramroop is an organisational inclusion strategist with her consultancy Unheard Voice, who's advised the likes of F1 and the Royal Institute of British Architects, and is happy to talk. She acknowledges DEI has been riven by failings, too obsessed with identity and set of behaviour, too tokenistic, under-resourced and lacking expertise. But there are fundamentals why it's still needed.
I think when we're talking about diversity, we can get lost because diversity is simply the fact of visible and invisible difference. We're all part of diversity. No demographic is outside the idea of inclusion. But what we do need to do is address underrepresentation.
In this diversity rollout, do you think white men have become collateral damage?
What I would say to that is that Paulo Freire and many others have said, when all you have ever known is privilege, equality feels like oppression. If you're white, you're not suffering racism. If you're a man, you're not suffering sexism. If you're able-bodied, you're not suffering ableism. This is what privilege is. It's not what you've had to do to get where you are. It's what you haven't had to deal with.
In the post-George Floyd rush to fix things, do you think the pendulum has swung too far and that fundamentally a lot of white men are having an unfair time of things and are feeling unnecessarily anxious about what they do, what they say, and their careers?
The kinds of impacts that you're describing, feeling like they're a victim, this is where everyone feels they are right now. Just for clarity, by the way, the statistics show that white able-bodied heterosexual men based in London only make up less than 3% of the UK population. And so we need to recognise when we look at who's in charge of our politics and economics and technology and media, and that this one demographic is significantly overrepresented across the leadership of our sectors and institutions. But we have to also recognise our own roles in perpetuating bias and listen when we hear those difficult truths. We do live in a racist society.
So, she says, we need to acutely focus on the impact we're having on others.
That's what every single individual needs to do in order for us to be effective at this work. And it's entirely possible. You know why it's possible, Tim? Because we have control over our own behaviours. And when you change your behaviours, when you change your world, then you can change the world.
In the days after George Floyd, companies were on a world-changing mission. DEI was non-negotiable, great for humanity and profits. As Meta proclaimed, diversity is critical to our success as a company. So surely CEOs would be fighting tooth and nail for diversity, even as the political winds now turn against it. Well, 10 days before President Trump was inaugurated, Meta canned its DEI programme. A slew of once other supportive companies have recently dumped or gutted their diversity programmes, either voluntarily or if they've got government contracts to comply with Trump's executive order seeking to ban DEI programmes. So, is this the end of the line for DEI? Has the groupthink spell been broken? Federal programmes in the US are done. Some big companies are DEI'd out. Virtue signalling backfired. Think Bud Light's dalliance with a trans influencer, and there are new masters to please. Others, though, are doubling down on diversity. The likes of Apple, Costco, Procter & Gamble as it stands. it's going to vary between companies, sectors and countries. Whilst the UK imported US diversity dogma with relish, it doesn't so far seem to be questioning it with as much gusto. Things will change, but for now, the vast majority of businesses remain committed to diversity programmes. The Institute of Directors found only 11% of its members expect to scale back DEI. Universities that fail to champion diversity could face funding cuts. Police officers and NHS staff are still being taught about white privilege. And a whopping sector employing thousands of consultants doesn't just die, it rebrands exactly as it did under Reagan. DEI? What DEI? At Disney and Walmart, it's now belonging. Inclusion and belonging at Victoria's Secret. Inclusion and diversity at Apple. Merely inclusion at Warner Brothers Discovery. Will DEI become just I, IND, IMB, IBD? It's all a bit gastroenterological.
If one thing bureaucrats are good at is justifying and expanding their own importance and the necessity of their positions and their salaries and so on. And so I think a lot of effort will be put into, again, rebranding.
Stefan Padfield was a liberal-leaning law professor who balked at the illiberalism of DEI, became executive director of the Free Enterprise Project, and has been using the likes of shareholder activism and lawsuits to keep politics and ideology out of corporate life.
It's as if we landed on Normandy Beach, which is a great achievement and lots to celebrate, but there is so much more work to do, and we see that every day with companies doubling down, and CEOs coming out and doubling down on DEI.
That work, he says, won't lie in the overtly illegal, a company hiring X% of one particular race, or the basic training to not get sued, don't pin up Playboy in the office, but where hiring can appear a little vague.
So when a company says we want our workforce to reflect the demographics of the communities we work in, that's just a long-winded way of saying we're going to discriminate on the basis of race and sex to get the numbers that match the community's demographics, right? So I think that is also going to be more challenged and will need more than simply reframing.
Do you think a lot of this is just now baked into HR departments?
Well, the extent to which HR departments are a problem and are such a problem that it's difficult to conceive of how they might be reconstituted in a way that doesn't immediately just re-germinate these issues. But I think we need to be very, very skeptical when we're simply told, we figured out what the problem is now, we'll stop doing it, we'll rebrand, just trust us, right? Because the very same people who are screaming and calling all of us on the right, racist and transphobic and all the labels that they were throwing out on their side are the same people we're supposed to trust when they reconfigure HR, and that's a hard thing to do.
I was totting up the cost before on the DEI ledger to men, free speech and all that, but surely one of the biggest costs has been the missed opportunity to those it could have helped. After George Floyd, fresh off the back of Me Too, there was an immense outpouring of goodwill, of humility, of peoples and companies saying, what can we do better? Work that still needs doing. Flicking through the Personnel Today site isn't pretty reading. A probation officer subject to monkey chance, a car salesman called Chapati and Poppadom, a casino that provided a gambler with a fair-skinned dealer they asked for. Awful examples that speak to wider intolerances and thwarted careers. But what if there'd been a different reaction after George Floyd? What if a different approach to justice and fairness had already been in the ascendant all these years that wasn't inspired by Marxist ideology, that didn't blow this generational moment by screaming, you're all a bunch of privileged racists, here's a blunt fix, who cares about the evidence? Just think what that goodwill, those billions could have achieved. So here's the $14 billion a year question. What should replace DEI? What are effective ways to drive out deep-rooted discrimination? Well, after canvassing the wisdom of key figures we've been hearing from all series, and diving into the evidence, with a modicum of confected pizzazz, I can now proudly present the alternative.
Does your business maybe have too few women and minorities? Would you like some genuine long-term diversity without any of that virtue signaling bollocks? Without pissing off a load of white men? Then you need DEO. Do everything obvious. A non-revolutionary, mildly predictable way to make a lasting but unsexy difference. Definitely no quick fix results guaranteed. Not suitable for closet Marxists.
Okay, two obvious planks underpin DEO. One, recruitment. That means actively targeting marginalised students in black, Hispanic and white areas when they're as young as 13 or 14 and without dropping entry standards. Two, supporting people once they're employed, giving them mentors and skills training at work, which is what the US Army does. Help with life stuff like childcare or looking after an aged parent. Running sessions that bring people together and emphasise what they have in common. And then having employee referral programs to broaden the recruitment talent pool and turn this into a virtuous circle. DEO, it hasn't got any splashy quotas or instant PR hits. It's going to be hard for me to charge thousands in consultancy. But the data says this is how you make a difference. Frank Dobbin from Harvard, whose homework I generously cribbed for the solutions, along with those of Dina Macmillan, Musa Al-Gharbi, Eric Smith, and others.
These are among the most effective ways to actually promote diversity. So we kind of know what works, and the things that work, there aren't many people opposing. Unfortunately, many of us, or many people in the DEI industry, want to die on the cross of diversity training.
And maybe for DEO, which I've already rebranded to O, to take root, we'll have to do some de-DEI-ification, pull up those ideological weeds. Professor Eric Smith would be good at that.
If I chuck DEI, I replace it with classical liberal values. I would replace it with true equality. I would replace it with freedom of speech. I would replace it with lessons about why we have these values in the first place. There are these religious wars in Europe, and people like Locke and Hobbes and various other people said, hey, we need another idea. We need something besides killing each other, right? Let's work on this. And they came up with these values, and that's why we have them. They didn't come from nowhere, right? We also need to start teaching resilience.
I could do with some of that resilience, given what could well happen to my career after putting this series out. But I said at the outset, I've long been motivated by championing men's mental health in my books, radio and TV shows, which, to still sound offensive, have been recognised by the charity Minds with their top media award. And it's striking how mentally harmful it's been to virtually every guy who ran afoul of DEI. Chaz, the ad exec, sacked for being a white man, still physically shaking from the trauma. Billy, the academic, canned for microaggressions around the name for cable leads, driven to antidepressants. Rob, the student overheard through a dorm wall, pushed into deeper depression. Cole, the dyslexic banker, too depressed to leave the house, now a locksmith. Beyond those directly affected, those millions of white men who are often anxious over something that could get them sacked. There's a fundamental point here. DEI completely misses what it's like to be a man. It's blinded by this idea of oppression of male privilege.
Obviously, white men have had it good for a long time.
Sure, there are some men at the top, those overrepresented male CEOs, who must be feeling pretty satisfied with life. But a lot of guys aren't waking up feeling bathed in privilege. They're on edge. Jobs are so central to men's identity, status, daily purpose and mental health. Look at those guys sacked over DEI infractions. Or the 2008 recession, which saw a spike of 10,000 additional male suicides in the US and Northern Europe. Or the opioids and alcohol that ravaged the jobless. Yet jobs for life are long gone. Millions of roles have disappeared to China. Half of US families are living paycheck to paycheck. So many men are in the grips of that most powerful of emotions, loss. It's churning over losses, which, as I said, keeps us awake at night, fuels rage and regret, makes us resort to desperate measures. Into this pit of worry, then throw in DEI, which for good reason makes men feel even more vulnerable. That fear of loss even more acute. We see those cast out lose everything. Half of us walk around, self-censoring, knowing we're one misstep from being ostracised, all whilst being told we're privileged racists. Is it any wonder that swathes of men are then drawn to politicians who are pledged to tearing this all down, to protecting them from loss, even if that pushback can seem unsparingly vindictive? DEI with its radical rollout, truly drafted its own demise and handed the pen to President Trump, aided and abetted by our biggest companies and institutions, when all along, I'm sure most guys would have been fine with sensible plans to make life fairer for everyone. Professor Alex Edmonds at London Business School.
And I think when all the dust settles and one realizes that actually the evidence is not as strong as people thought, then we might look at this as like any other bubble, let's say a tech bubble or the tulip bubble or the South China Sea bubble, that there was a lot of excitement not backed up by real fundamentals and evidence.
Living through a bubble is discombobulating, but in this one you can't even say, I think those tulips or .com shares are a bit overpriced, without being banished by your peers. Time for one final check-in with therapist Carol Sherwood.
How do you think we'll look back at this period of history?
That is such a good question. I wish I had a crystal ball. This is how I hope we'll look back on it, because I'm fearful we haven't actually got rid of it yet. But as an unnecessarily cruel and divisive period of history, and like a kind of madness. That's probably not something as a psychologist I should say, but I think you know what I mean. Thinking about people who've actually lost their livelihoods and their reputations for things like stating biological facts or being wrongly accused of racism or patriarchy. We'll look back at it with a lot of sorrow, because there are a lot of people taking their lives because they've been shamed and ostracised, and that is wrong. Most of all, perhaps it's a period when harm was inflicted in the name of preventing harm.
That's it for this series. If you've missed any shows, they're all at timsamuels.com. I'd love to keep doing more of this type of journalism. Do subscribe to my YouTube channel to see what happens next. Thanks to everyone who was willing to stick their heads above the parapet, and thank you for your support. Cheerio.